portfolio, but I'm doing it as a video because I think this would be more fun and like more interesting, I guess. So, some backstory. I've always been really interested in writing. My mom always joked that it came from the fact that she would read to me so much when I was like a really little kid. Seriously, like I had an impressive book collection at like such a young age. I also liked writing stories and creating new worlds to like imagine because I was a very imaginative little kid. Um, However, reading papers for school is very different. I struggled with writing something that wasn't fiction, I found, because there were so many rules that I felt like I had to follow, and I never really felt happy with what I was writing, no matter what. Um, Going into this class, I have written a lot of papers. I completed the IB program throughout my last 2 years of high school, so I wrote a lot of papers. I felt like, oh, this will be a really easy class, like it won't be too much extra work. But I was very wrong. I never spent more time on a single paper than I have in this class. I was very overwhelmed, to say the least. Usually I would write 1, maybe 2 drafts if I was feeling ambitious and then submit that. I would never brainstorm beforehand, I would just write what came to mind, or I never wrote outlines. Maybe I should write my philosophy IB paper about a philosopher I saw on YouTube 2 years ago. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I know that sounds really silly, but I would never write down like on a piece of paper what I might be interested in exploring. So when I was stuck on what to write, I would use the first thing that came to mind. Well, for this first project, I wrote a page and a half of topics that were relevant to me, and then I sat with them before I decided to write about pageantry. First, I was like, oh, I can just write about how COVID changed me. Then I remembered that nobody wants to not talk about COVID more than me, so I moved on, which might I say was pretty big growth for me. Past me probably would have just like wrote about COVID, not liked it, and then submitted it just to be done. I did this for the last project as well, just so that I could find something that would interest me enough to talk about in this like long span of time we were given to work on this project. Another thing that changed for me was I did not like that I had to write a completely different second draft. I was like, why do I even have to do this? My first draft is good enough. I have other homework that's also due soon. However, I realized the more time I spent with a paper, the better it turned out. This realization occurred the most when we were working on a personal narrative. This one paragraph in particular felt very off to me, so spending more one-on-one time with this specific paragraph really improved the writing. I'm just gonna read off a couple of sentences that I think changed the most. First sentence, the like unedited one. When the evening gown began, I felt less confident in the dress that was tailored to me. I thought I looked beautiful in it before, but something had changed. I looked in the mirror and saw the dress as unflattering and bulky, which the edited version changed to this. I looked at myself in the custom-fit dress and wondered if it made me look bulky or uncomfortable. I was confused as to why this time it felt different. I never noticed my weight or size before, so why did I care now? As you can see, it changed a lot. So it initially started off as one paragraph, but then it like turned into 3 smaller paragraphs. Out of like all of it, these few sentences stood out to me the most. The edited version felt more personal compared to the first one that felt very rushed to me, and like I was trying to fit too much information into one sentence. I found that editing one paragraph at a time really helped me because when I was editing a paper, I felt very overwhelmed, and I would jump from paragraph to paragraph to like, oh, change this, change this. But like sitting down and just being like, okay, I'm just gonna work on this one for like 30 minutes really helped because I was like dedicating all my time to this one thing instead of jumping around and not really doing much. I use this many times as well going forward just to help like slow down the paper because I feel like when I write like I want to get everything out as fast as I can when I don't have to do that and I can take my time writing and saying what I want to say. It was the same exact paper that we were given the exercise to reformat our entire paper. I actually really found this fun because I like took my iPad and I color coded all the paragraphs and I numbered them, and then I reorganized all the numbers to find like a new way to like, fit it all together. I did not include these changes in my final draft, but I did use this on the next project. So I'm gonna be honest, I did not know how to start project 2. My first draft, I talked about 2 different perspectives on language and then loosely tied them together. But then after completing my first short draft, I quickly went on to write my second draft. This time I felt more comfortable with starting fresh because of all the work I did in my first paper. In my first draft, I jumped straight into John McWhorter's TED Talk about texting, then followed it with Jamila Lyscott's 3 Ways to Speak English spoken poem. The way I wrote this felt very crammed together. It just wasn't the best overall. However, for my second draft, I began with Lyscott's poem and then eased into McWhorter's TED Talk. For me, it made it easier to connect their 2 ideas together. And although it was a smaller fix, I 100% got the idea from the fact that we had to rearrange our last project just like a couple weeks prior. So throughout my time as a writer, I've been asked to write many research papers, and they were never really my favorite, but I was never asked to write an exploratory essay on what was interesting to me. This was definitely a challenge. It was just a very different style of writing that I was not used to. I felt like I had to stick to not using personal pronouns, not asking questions as I went, and tried to make it seem as professional as possible, whatever I thought that meant to me at the time. But after reading my group's papers, I realized that you don't have to do that in order to make your writing sound professional or educated. I actually think that reading more examples helped me solidify that idea in my head. I also realized that to make the paragraphs flow better together, you can ask questions and you can use personal pronouns. Doing a simple Command F in my first versus second draft. My first one, I only used 3 question marks versus my second draft, I used 12. Granted, one of the question marks is in the title for both, but still, it's a big growth for me at least, especially knowing how uncomfortable I was with the idea. In draft 2, I also used sentences such as, while reflecting on what I have read, and ending the paragraphs with a question, are we truly animals built to reproduce and not be happy? These are things that I, again, did not do in my first draft. Surprisingly, I did like my writing a lot more when I did this. It felt like an easier read, and my paper seemed more like what you would expect in a newspaper or an article. And I think I would enjoy writing more of this style of paper in the future because it feels professional and knowledgeable, but it's still very personable. Moving away from projects, the way I peer review has also changed throughout the semester. In high school, it was very you skim the person's paper that they submitted on Schoology, you write good, or you change little comma mistakes, and then maybe just add more and it'll be good. This class forced me to actually absorb what the paper was saying and able to provide good feedback. The first peer review, we had to write questions to the author, and I genuinely enjoyed that. It was a good way to better understand where the author was coming from and what they were trying to convey. I believe it is this tool that made me feel comfortable suggesting what the author could further explore in their paper. I also found myself getting excited to read other people's papers because they were also very interesting and well written, and it was just a good time for me. The RRRs were also very helpful for writing papers. Not only were they examples of what I would have to write in the short future, but answering the questions helped me with the peer review process. Why I Play for Iraq was my personal favorite article that we had to read because it was very engaging. Having questions to respond to made me actually think about the essay and makes you process it, because you're trying to answer these questions. For this essay in particular, I liked how he openly wrote about his emotions, and by having the climax towards the end of the article, it shows his growth, but it also keeps the reader engaged. I really liked that, and I really liked the RRRs, but this one in particular was my favorite. So a future project I would be interested in writing would be a research paper on the behavior of dogs and what influences it. My family breeds and trains dogs, so it'd be really interesting to learn about all the factors that go into their temperament. The tone would be informative, but I would also like to keep it lighthearted and an easy read, because I know for me, if a paper uses a bunch of really big words that I don't know, I'm gonna be okay, maybe this article isn't for me. I feel the easiest research would be to search through online databases, maybe interviewing people who are around dogs a lot, vets, trainers, that kind of thing. Maybe groomers too, just to see like how temperament can change between breeds, or like if it's nature versus nurture, how much of each goes into it. Just be really interesting to me. The audience would be anyone who is interested in dogs' temperament, but mostly for like everyday people who are just curious about their dogs and how personality is determined. I don't really know any dog magazines, but it'd be cool to see my essay published on the AKC website, which is the American Kennel Club. My dogs are AKC certified. She's laying on my chair right now. She's right there. So yeah, that wraps up my final portfolio. Thank you for watching.